Ethan West had survived many dangerous missions among the stars, but nothing compared to the moment his ship began to shake like it was being torn apart by invisible hands. Sparks shot across the cockpit, alarms screamed, and the control panel burned under his fingertips. He fought to keep the ship steady, but the engines were already dying. He slammed a hand on the emergency landing sequence, hoping it would slow him enough to survive. The small explorer ship punched through thick violet clouds as if entering a different world. Lightning crackled around him in strange spiral shapes. The air outside glowed with an unknown energy. Ethan could feel the heat biting through the metal hull. He gritted his teeth, locking the seat harness tighter, as the ground rose fast beneath him. The crash was loud, violent, and full of blinding light. Metal groaned, and trees shattered as the ship skidded across alien soil, finally slamming into a wide patch of grass. Then everything went still. For a long moment, Ethan didn't move. His ears rang. His vision blurred, and the smell of smoke stung his nose. When he finally opened his eyes fully, he saw the cracked ceiling above him and felt the drip of coolant running down the side of his face. His body ached everywhere, but he was alive. He pushed himself out of the seat with slow, shaking arms. The front window of the cockpit had broken open, letting alien air rush in. It smelled like flowers mixed with something metallic. Outside, the sky was still glowing violet, but he could see sunlight pushing through in patches. He grabbed his emergency pack, pulled out a small oxygen meter, and checked the atmosphere. The reading blinked green. The air was breathable. At least that was one good thing. When he stepped outside, the world looked like something out of a dream. Giant trees with silver-blue leaves towered above him. The grass was a deep teal color, soft like silk. Strange birds with crystal-like wings flew in the distance, leaving trails of sparkling dust behind them. Everything was peaceful for a moment, almost beautiful. But Ethan knew peace never lasted long after a crash. He checked the damage on his ship and realized the truth. He wasn't going anywhere. The engine was destroyed, and the communication system was cracked in half. Even if he tried to fix something, he didn't have the parts. He was truly stranded. He was about to look for water when he heard the sound of footsteps, but heavier than any human footsteps he had ever heard. They were rhythmic, powerful, almost like drums hitting the ground. Ethan slowly turned, his heart tightening. A group of tall figures stepped between the silver trees. At first, he thought they were wearing armor. But then he realized the armor was part of their bodies, woven with natural patterns that looked both ancient and elegant. These were women, alien women, each one towering at least a head above him. Their skin had faint markings like glowing tattoos. Their eyes were sharp and bright. Studying him with intensity, the lead warrior stepped forward. She had a spear in her hand, made of something that shimmered like star metal. She spoke in a language Ethan didn't recognize, her voice firm and commanding. The other warriors tightened their formation, surrounding him slowly but with clear discipline. Ethan raised his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not your enemy. I crashed here." The women didn't understand his words, but they understood his tone. Their leader gestured, and two warriors moved closer. They didn't hurt him. They inspected him, checked his arms, his neck, maybe to make sure he wasn't sick or dangerous. Their touch was firm but not cruel. Then they bound his hands gently but securely with glowing ropes that felt warm like living vines. Ethan didn't resist. He knew he didn't stand a chance against even one of them, let alone 6 heavily armed ones. They guided him through the forest, moving with silent speed despite their size. Ethan stumbled occasionally, but one of the warriors would always steady him before he fell. They weren't treating him like a prisoner. They were treating him like something very important. The forest opened into a massive clearing, and Ethan froze. In front of him stood a stone arena so large it looked like it was built for giants. Tall columns carved with battle scenes circled the structure. Hundreds, no, thousands of alien women were gathered inside, standing in rows like disciplined soldiers. Their armor glowed softly under the sun, and their spears rested at their sides. The moment Ethan was brought in, every single pair of eyes turned toward him. He felt heat crawl up his neck. The entire arena seemed to be studying him with curiosity and excitement. Some whispering began. Like a wave of sound moving through the crowd, the warriors escorting him led him to the center of the arena. A raised platform sat there, decorated with bright ribbons and strange symbols. Ethan noticed several women already standing around it, stretching their arms, rolling their shoulders, preparing like fighters before a tournament. The air buzzed with tension. Ethan didn't understand what was happening, but he could feel the intensity of it. The whispering suddenly stopped. A deep horn echoed across the arena, and then the crowd parted in perfect order. From the far entrance, footsteps approached, slow, steady, and powerful. Ethan swallowed hard as the figure came into view. She was taller than all the others, even more imposing. Her armor was black and silver, marked with glowing crimson patterns. Her hair was long, braided with metallic strands that clinked softly. Her eyes were sharp and deep, holding a commanding presence that made everyone around her bow their heads instantly. This was their queen, Queen Kaylana. Ethan could feel the atmosphere change the moment she entered. She didn't shout or gesture. Her presence alone silenced the thousands watching. As she approached Ethan, he could see that she wasn't just strong, she was graceful, in a way that made her movements look almost like flowing water. She stopped in front of him, studying him closely. Her eyes weren't cold. They held something else. Curiosity. Maybe even a hint of fascination. She touched the glowing rope binding his wrists, and it snapped open instantly, as if the rope itself obeyed her command. Ethan rubbed his wrists carefully. "Thanks," he said softly, though he knew she didn't understand. Kaylana spoke a single word in her language, her voice deep and steady. At that signal, the warriors around the arena raised their weapons into the air. The crowd erupted in cheers, stomping their feet in a rhythmic pattern. Ethan blinked in confusion as several fighters stepped into the center circle. They stretched their arms, preparing themselves for combat. He glanced around nervously. They couldn't be fighting him, right? But they weren't looking at him. They were looking at each other. Two warriors crashed together first, their spears clashing with a bright flash. A third jumped in, swinging a blade made from crystal. Cheers filled the arena as the fighters moved with speed and skill Ethan had never seen before. They fought fiercely, each determined to win. And then he understood. They were fighting for him. His heart thudded. He wasn't sure if he should feel honored or terrified. Women were being thrown to the ground. Blades cut through the air, armor cracked, all for the right to claim the strange male who had fallen from the sky. He wanted to shout that he didn't belong to anyone, that he was just trying to survive. But the noise of the arena drowned everything out. More battles continued, each warrior stronger than the last. Ethan could barely keep up with the speed of their movements. These women were born fighters, disciplined, fearless, powerful, yet none of them compared to the queen. Kaylana watched in silence, her expression calm and unreadable. Ethan noticed how none of the fighters dared step near her. Her presence alone created a respectful distance. She didn't rush into battle. She didn't need to. Finally, when the last warrior stood victorious over her opponents, breathing heavily and covered in dust, Kaylana moved. She stepped forward, unarming herself by placing her spear on the ground. The crowd roared louder than before. The warrior facing her hesitated, but pride pushed her forward. She attacked with all her strength, her movements sharp and full of confidence. Kaylana dodged the first strike without even blinking. The second strike she caught with her bare hand. The third she turned aside with a simple twist of her wrist. Within seconds, she had gently but firmly knocked the warrior to the ground. It wasn't brutal. It wasn't cruel. It was effortless. The arena fell silent. Kaylana lifted her gaze toward Ethan. Her eyes locked onto his, and he felt a strange wave of warmth in his chest. In that moment, it felt like he could hear her without any translation. She stepped forward, placing one hand on her chest in a gesture he didn't recognize. She spoke clearly, her voice echoing through the arena. To the crowd, it meant one thing. Their undefeated queen had chosen him. Ethan stood frozen. The entire arena exploded into cheers, chants, and deafening celebration. Warriors stomped their feet, banners waved, and the sound shook the stone beneath him. Ethan looked at Kaylana, trying to understand. Her expression softened slightly, and for a brief moment, it looked like she was telling him not to fear. He didn't know if being chosen was a good thing or a terrible thing. But he did know one thing for sure: his life had just changed forever. Ethan didn't sleep at all the night after the Queen chose him. Even though the palace room they gave him was large and comfortable, his mind kept spinning with questions he couldn't answer. Why had Kaylana chosen him? What did it mean in their culture? And most importantly, was he safe? Or had he just stepped into a life he couldn't escape? Outside his room, two tall guards stood like statues. Their armor glowed softly in the dim hallway, and their eyes stayed fixed forward, never blinking. Ethan could tell they weren't there to imprison him, they were there to protect him. Every time he peeked out the door, both guards bowed their heads slightly, as if he were someone important. It didn't feel real. He sat on the edge of his bed, his hands in his hair. The palace around him seemed alive with quiet sounds, the hum of crystals in the walls, the distant footsteps of patrolling soldiers, the echo of deep chants somewhere far below. Everything was peaceful, but he still felt like a stranger dragged into a world he didn't understand. Morning arrived quickly. A soft knock came at his door. And when he opened it, a young warrior woman stood there holding a tray of food. She wasn't as tall as the guards, but she carried herself with pride. The tray held round blue fruits, steaming bread, and a glass of glowing water that looked almost magical. She bowed to him. Kaylana, Kor Vel Ath. Ethan didn't understand the words, but her gentle tone told him it was something respectful. He thanked her anyway. Thanks. I appreciate it. She blinked in surprise, then smiled shyly, as if the sound of his voice was something rare or special. She placed the tray inside and stepped back. Ethan watched her leave, wondering why every woman he met looked at him like he was something precious. It was strange, even uncomfortable at times, but he could also feel the sincerity in their actions. After he ate, the guards escorted him through the palace. He saw long halls decorated with carvings of battles fought centuries ago. There were statues of past queens, each carved with glowing patterns. The palace wasn't only a home, it was the heart of their entire society. The guards stopped in front of a wide double door. One of them tapped her shoulder, sending a pulse of energy through the door. It opened slowly with a deep sound that echoed like thunder. Inside, Queen Kaylana stood beside a massive table covered in holographic maps. Several high-ranking warriors surrounded her, studying the shapes and symbols glowing above the table. When Ethan entered, every warrior turned to look at him. Their eyes softened instantly, and they bowed respectfully. Kaylana's gaze followed them before landing on Ethan. Her expression was much warmer than yesterday's sharp battlefield intensity. She walked toward him slowly, her tall frame moving with an elegance that made even seasoned warriors step aside. When she reached him, she spoke in her language, her voice calm. "Ethan," she said, clearly practicing his name carefully. She gestured for him to follow her. He nodded and followed her through a smaller side door into a quieter room. This room had soft lights and warm colors, clearly designed for peaceful conversation. Kaylana sat on a cushioned seat and pointed for him to sit across from her. Ethan sat, feeling strangely nervous even though she was the one who had chosen him. She placed her hand on her chest again and spoke. "Kaylana," he smiled lightly. "I know. You're Kaylana." "Queen Kaylana." She tilted her head, watching his mouth as he spoke, trying to understand. Then she repeated quietly, "Queen Kaylana," as if testing the human words. Ethan realized she wanted communication, not control. He pointed to himself. "Ethan." She nodded. "Ethan." It wasn't perfect, but it made him smile. They spent several minutes exchanging simple gestures and names of objects. She would point to her armor and say a word, and he would repeat it. Then he would point to his arm or his shirt and say the English word for her to repeat. Her deep voice softened when she spoke in English, as if she feared breaking the word. It was strangely endearing. After a while, Kaylana pointed to the holographic display on the table. She showed him a symbol of his crashed ship, then pointed to different regions on the planet. He understood she was trying to explain something important about his arrival. Ethan tried to follow. My ship. Crash. Accident. I didn't come here on purpose. She listened carefully, though she couldn't understand most of his words. Still, the way she focused on him made it clear she respected his attempts. Then the door slammed open. One of the palace strategists rushed inside, breathing heavily and bowing quickly. She spoke urgently in their language, her tone sharp. Kaylana's expression shifted instantly, calm turning into concern. Ethan watched as the queen asked several quick questions, her voice crisp and commanding. The strategist answered with tense gestures and worried eyes. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. Something was wrong. Kaylana turned toward him, her expression troubled. She placed a hand on her chest, then extended her arm toward him, a gesture she had used before when claiming him. But this time, her eyes looked almost protective. She spoke softly. Ravkor clans. Seek you. Ethan didn't know the exact meaning, but he understood enough. Someone else wanted him. Kaylana gestured for him to stay close as she led him through a different hallway. They stepped outside onto a wide balcony overlooking the capital. For the first time, Ethan saw the entire city. Towering buildings made of stone and glowing metal rose into the sky. Warriors trained in open courtyards. Children ran across bridges connecting tall towers. Everything looked peaceful and strong, but far beyond the city walls, Ethan could see smoke. Kaylana pointed toward it. Ravkor, she said again. He understood now. A rival clan was approaching, and they wanted him. Kaylana turned to him, her eyes firm, protective, almost fierce. She placed her hand on his shoulder, a gesture that surprised him. Her hand was warm and strong, and he felt the meaning behind it even without words. She was telling him she wouldn't let anything happen to him. They moved back inside the palace and gathered with the strategists. Through gestures and holograms, Ethan pieced together the situation. The Ravkor clan believed a male outsider could give them political advantage, and they were willing to attack the capital to take him. Ethan felt a mix of fear and guilt. He didn't want their world thrown into chaos because of him. He didn't want anyone hurt. He wanted to help, not be a burden. He stepped forward and pointed to himself, then to the city walls, trying to say he wanted to assist in the defense. The warriors around him gasped softly. Males on this planet never volunteered for danger. They were protected, hidden, kept safe. But Ethan was human, and humans didn't hide when danger arrived. Kaylana stared at him for a long moment. Her eyes widened slightly, not in anger but in disbelief. She stepped closer, looking straight into his eyes. Her voice came out low, almost disbelieving. You fight? He didn't know how to explain everything humans believed in: courage, responsibility, protecting the innocent. So he answered the only way he could. He placed his hand on his chest, then pointed toward the smoky horizon. Kaylana exhaled softly, something like admiration in her eyes. She gently touched his hand just a brief moment, but it carried deep meaning. Then she shook her head and gestured firmly. No, she wouldn't let him endanger himself. He understood, but he didn't step back. Before either of them could say anything more, a loud explosion shook the palace walls. Cries echoed outside. The Ravkor clan had already reached the capital. Kaylana snapped into action instantly. She spoke rapid orders, and the warriors rushed toward the battlefield. Ethan followed her down the steps, ignoring the guards trying to pull him back. He saw injured civilians running through the streets, smoke rising from burning buildings, and warriors clashing with the invading clan. Without thinking, he sprinted toward the chaos. A large stone beam had fallen onto one of Kaylana's elite guards, trapping her. Flames burned nearby, and smoke filled the air. Ethan didn't hesitate. He pushed against the beam with all his strength, his muscles screaming. The guard looked at him with shock. No male was supposed to risk himself like this. Ethan gritted his teeth, forcing the beam upward inch by inch, until the warrior crawled free. She gasped, staring at him, as if witnessing something unbelievable. He didn't stay for thanks. He ran toward the next injured person. He pulled a child out from behind a broken wall. He guided civilians to safer paths. He dragged a wounded warrior away from collapsing debris. The planet's strongest women watched in stunned disbelief as a small, unarmored human male risked himself again and again without fear. Kaylana finally reached him, her eyes wide. She grabbed his shoulders, her hands trembling lightly, not with fear, but with something deeper. Ethan had soot all over him, his clothes torn, a cut on his arm. But he was still running toward danger. Kaylana couldn't believe what she was seeing. Here, on Varos, males were fragile treasures to be sheltered. But Ethan wasn't acting like someone who needed protection. He looked like a warrior who protected others. The battle grew louder around them, the air filled with shouts and clashes. Kaylana pulled Ethan close, almost like she was afraid he might disappear into the flames. For the first time in her life, the undefeated queen felt something strong and unfamiliar rise in her chest. She was not just protecting a male, she wanted to protect him, and she realized Ethan was changing everything she thought she knew about courage, strength, and what it meant to care for someone. The night sky over Varos burned with orange flames and drifting smoke. The enemy clan, Ravkor, pushed deeper into the capital, their warriors shouting battle cries as they tried to break the queen's defenses. Buildings shook with every explosion, and the ground trembled beneath Ethan's feet. Even though he was exhausted, covered in soot and dust, he refused to stop moving. Someone needed help every moment, and he could not ignore that. He had just pulled an injured elder away from falling rubble when he noticed 3 Ravkor fighters running toward the palace gates. They were tall, heavily armored, and carrying strange energy weapons. Ethan knew what they were trying to do. They were heading straight for Kaylana. The queen was the strongest warrior on the planet, but even she could not be everywhere. Without thinking, Ethan stepped in their path. His heart hammered violently, and fear tightened his chest, but his legs didn't move away. His instinct, the one that had saved others before, pushed him forward instead. He grabbed a broken spear from the ground. It was twice as heavy as any farming tool he had used back on Earth, but he held it with both hands and stood his ground. The Ravkor warriors slowed, staring at him with disbelief, then laughter. A male standing in their way was unheard of. A human male, even smaller compared to Varosian warriors, must have looked completely foolish to them. But Ethan didn't move. One of the Ravkor fighters charged at him, swinging her weapon downward. He dodged clumsily, barely avoiding the blow. The impact cracked the ground beside him. He stumbled, but stayed standing. The warrior lunged again. Ethan managed to strike her arm with the broken spear. Not enough to injure her, but enough to surprise her. She hissed, anger flaring in her eyes. The second Ravkor stepped forward to help her. Ethan felt his legs shake. He was outmatched, outclassed, and completely untrained in their style of combat. But he thought of the people behind him, Kaylana, the civilians, the wounded warriors who had trusted him. He couldn't give up. Even if he fell, he had to buy them a few more moments. He lifted the spear again. The Ravkor fighters charged together. Before they could reach him, a shockwave tore through the street, sending dust flying and shaking the ground. A shadow landed beside Ethan, with the force of a meteor. When the dust cleared, Queen Kaylana was standing there, her armor glowing crimson, her eyes burning with a fierce fire Ethan had never seen before. She didn't look at the enemy first. She looked at Ethan, blood on his arm, sweat on his face, fear in his eyes, but standing tall anyway. Something inside her chest tightened, and she stepped slightly in front of him, as if shielding him instinctively. Then she turned toward the Ravkor. Her voice was so sharp and fierce that it made even the enemy warriors hesitate. She roared a command in her language, and the sound echoed across the ruined streets like thunder. The Ravkor fighters lunged toward her, but Kaylana moved like a storm made of muscle and light. She dodged the first strike, caught the second, shattered the third weapon with her bare hand, and with a single twist of her body, she threw 2 warriors across the street. The third warrior tried to retreat, but Kaylana was faster. She grabbed the Ravkor fighter's arm, pinned her to the ground, and ended the fight without unnecessary harm. She didn't kill them. She didn't need to. Her power alone was enough to crush any resistance. Ethan watched in awe. She wasn't just strong, she was breathtakingly skilled. Each movement precise and controlled. She was a warrior, a guardian, a queen. But when she turned back to Ethan, her expression softened instantly. She placed her hand on his cheek, checking him for injuries. Her touch was gentle despite the strength in her muscles. She murmured something worriedly in her language, her eyebrows drawn together. He smiled weakly. "I'm okay." She didn't understand the words, but she understood his tone. She exhaled in relief, her shoulders lowering just a little. Then she took his hand, holding it tightly as if afraid he might vanish again into danger. The ground trembled again. But this time it wasn't an explosion, it was the footsteps of an entire army. More Ravkor warriors approached from the city gates, armed with heavy weapons. They shouted their war cry, preparing for their final attack. Ethan swallowed fear as they filled the street. Hundreds of them. Kaylana stepped in front of him once again. Raising her spear, she looked ready to fight the entire army alone if she had to. But before the Ravkor could charge, another horn sounded deep and shaking the sky itself. From the opposite side of the city, thousands of Varosian soldiers streamed into the battlefield. Warriors with silver armor and glowing blades moved in formation. Their steps synchronized and powerful. They surrounded the capital, pushing the Ravkor forces back slowly. Kaylana raised her spear high. The Varosian warriors roared in return, their voices booming like thunder. The battle turned quickly. The Ravkor, seeing they were both outnumbered and outmatched, began to retreat. Their leader, a tall woman with jagged armor, glared at Kaylana from across the battlefield. She pointed toward Ethan, shouting something filled with fury and warning. Then she fled with her remaining fighters. Slowly, the fire in the streets died down. The smoke drifted away with the wind. Civilians came out from hiding, checking on one another. Healers rushed to the wounded. The capital still stood. Varos had survived. Ethan released a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. His legs finally gave out, and he sank to his knees. Kaylana knelt beside him, offering her support. He leaned on her, too tired to care about anything except the warmth of her presence. She spoke to him softly, brushing dust from his hair. Even though he didn't understand her words, he knew what she meant. He had saved lives today. She carried him gently back to the palace with the help of her guards. Inside, healers surrounded him, examining his cuts and bruises. But the whole time, Kaylana stayed close, watching carefully, as if making sure they treated him with respect. When the healers finished, Ethan sat up slowly, feeling sore but relieved. Kaylana dismissed the healers and approached him alone. Her armor was cracked and scratched, her face smudged with dirt, but her eyes were shining more brightly than ever. She placed her hand on her chest, then touched his chest lightly. The gesture seemed to mean something deep and personal in their culture. Ethan felt his heartbeat quicken. She spoke quietly, her voice deeper and softer than usual. "Ethan? Korvenkala." He didn't know the exact words, but he felt the meaning. "You matter to me." She repeated the gesture, this time her fingers shaking just a little. For someone as strong and composed as her, that tiny tremble carried more emotion than 1,000 words. Ethan looked into her eyes. "Kaylana, thank you. For protecting me. For everything." She didn't understand the language, but she understood his expression, his tone, his heart. She lowered her forehead to his for a moment. A gentle, intimate gesture in Varosian tradition. Ethan felt warmth spread through him. Later that evening, the palace held a huge gathering. Warriors filled the grand hall, cheering for their queen's victory. But when Ethan entered beside Kaylana, the cheering grew even louder. Warriors stomped their feet in respect, chanting a new word that echoed across the hall. "Ethan! Ethan!" He looked around in confusion until Kaylana leaned close and whispered softly, "Champion." His face warmed. He wasn't used to praise, especially not from an entire planet of warriors. But to them, he was the male who had run into danger, who had saved lives, who had fought even when he had no chance of winning. He had shown them the heart of humanity. Kaylana stepped forward, lifting his hand for everyone to see. The hall erupted in cheers again. She spoke loudly, her voice filling the entire room with pride and emotion. She declared him a champion of Varos. And then, in a moment that made the entire hall fall silent, she turned toward him and repeated the gesture she had shown earlier. Her fingers touched her chest, then touched his. Ethan realized what it meant now. She was choosing him not as a ritual prize, but as her equal, a partner beside her, not behind her. Someone she respected, admired, and wanted to stand with her. Ethan swallowed, emotion tightening his chest. He placed his hand over hers gently, feeling the warmth of her touch. She smiled. Small, rare, but filled with meaning. The hall exploded into celebration again, but Ethan only heard the sound of his own heartbeat. On a planet where women fought for power and strength ruled every corner of society, he had arrived by accident, but he stayed by choice. And the queen who had chosen him once by tradition, now chose him from her heart. The celebrations in the grand hall lasted long into the night. But Ethan could barely hear the cheering anymore. His mind was full of everything that had happened, the battle, the danger, the crowd calling him champion, and Kaylana's quiet, powerful gesture that had struck deeper than any words. He had never felt so welcomed in a place that was not his home. And yet, he also felt the weight of being the only human on an alien planet, chosen by its strongest ruler for reasons that were becoming more personal than political. When the celebration finally ended, Kaylana walked beside him through the palace halls. The torches along the walls glowed softly with blue fire, throwing moving shadows on the stone. The corridors were quiet now, peaceful, nothing like the chaos outside earlier. Ethan glanced at Kaylana, who moved with slow, relaxed steps for the first time all day. She wasn't carrying her spear. She wasn't wearing her battle armor. She looked simply like a woman walking home after a long day. But to Ethan, she was still the queen, undefeated, powerful, and now, someone who cared for him in ways he was starting to understand more clearly. Kaylana opened a door to a balcony that overlooked the entire city. Ethan followed her outside, feeling the cool night wind brush against his skin. The fires in the distance were finally out, and soft lights lit the streets far below. The people of Varos were moving quietly, rebuilding, helping each other, checking on neighbors. There was no fear now. The danger had passed, replaced by calm pride. For a while, neither of them spoke. Kaylana leaned against the railing, watching the city. Ethan stood beside her, wondering how he could thank her, or how he could explain any of his thoughts when they barely understood each other's language. Kaylana turned toward him slowly. She touched his forearm lightly and said his name with a softness he had never heard from her before. Ethan. He smiled. Yeah, I'm here. She placed her other hand on her chest, then extended it toward him again, the same gesture she had made earlier in the hall, the one filled with meaning. But this time, her eyes held something more, something personal, gentle, almost vulnerable. Ethan felt warmth rise in his chest. He raised his own hand carefully and touched his chest, trying to mirror her gesture. When he reached toward her, she caught his wrist gently, as if treasuring the moment. Even without words, he understood. The Queen of Varos chose him not for tradition, not because he was a rare male, not to impress the clans. She chose him because she saw something in him that made her heart shift. Kaylana stepped closer. For a brief moment, she lowered her forehead against his again, breathing slowly. Ethan felt her warmth, her steady heartbeat, and the strong scent of her armor and skin. It was a simple gesture, but it felt deeply intimate, the kind of connection that didn't need speech. When she stepped back, she spoke softly, pointing toward him, then to herself, then making a small circle around them with her fingers. He didn't know the exact meaning, but he felt it had something to do with unity, protection, or partnership. He wished he could tell her clearly how much he respected her, how grateful he was, how he wasn't afraid of her strength. But he didn't know how to express it, so he did the only thing he could. He took a slow breath and nodded, placing his hand over hers gently. Kaylana's eyes softened with relief and warmth, and she squeezed his hand lightly before stepping back again. She gestured that they should return inside. The two walked deeper into the palace until they reached a quiet inner garden, hidden behind tall walls and glowing vines. Water flowed from a small fountain, and strange birds slept on branches overhead. The place felt like a sanctuary. Ethan guessed this was where the queen went when she wanted peace away from constant duty. Kaylana sat on a long stone bench and motioned for Ethan to sit beside her. Before he could even ask, she tapped a glowing stone embedded in the wall. A holographic image filled the air, his crashed ship, surrounded by tiny symbols and readings. Ethan's chest tightened. He had almost forgotten the ship existed. Kaylana pointed to the hologram, then to him. "Home," she said in slow, careful English. Ethan froze. She understood that word. She wanted to talk about his home. She tapped the hologram of the ship again, tilting her head, her expression thoughtful. "Ethan, home?" He stared at the image. Earth, his family, his life before all this. The vast distance between him and everything he knew. A heavy feeling settled in his chest. He missed home more than he had allowed himself to feel until now. He nodded slowly. "Yes, home." Kaylana's eyes softened with understanding. She repeated quietly, "Home." Then she surprised him. She touched the hologram of the ship and dragged her hand upward. The image changed into a star chart. She moved glowing stars aside until she reached a symbol marked with warmth. It was Earth. Ethan's heart jumped. "They knew where Earth was?" Kaylana nodded. She spoke slowly, tapping the star that represented Earth. "We know." He blinked, trying to understand. Did that mean Verosians had mapped parts of space humans didn't even know about? Did they know of Earth before he arrived? Kaylana made a circle around Earth on the hologram, then pointed to him again, her eyes gentle but serious. He understood. She was asking him if he wanted to go home. Ethan opened his mouth and closed it again. His throat tightened. He had dreamed of returning, of seeing familiar skies and hearing human voices again. Yet now that the question was directly in front of him, he felt torn in a way he never expected, because leaving meant departing from someone who had stood beside him, protected him, respected him, and cared for him without ever using words. It meant leaving Kaylana. She watched him quietly, waiting. She didn't push him. She didn't demand an answer. She simply offered the choice, like a leader who respected freedom above all else. Finally, Ethan spoke softly. "It's not that I don't want to go home. He couldn't finish, but Kaylana understood the hesitation in his eyes. She placed a hand gently on his shoulder. Her touch was warm and steady, comforting in a way that surprised him. She shook her head softly, as if telling him he didn't need to decide now. There was time. There was no pressure. Then she stood and extended her hand to him. Ethan looked at her hand, strong and open. He took it without hesitation. She led him out of the garden and into a large training hall filled with warriors practicing with their weapons. The moment he entered beside Kaylana, every warrior stopped and bowed respectfully. Ethan felt heat rise in his face. He wasn't used to this level of honor, but Kaylana's gentle smile calmed him. She lifted a spear from the weapon rack and handed it to him. Ethan stared at it in confusion. She wanted him to train. Kaylana walked behind him, placing her hands over his, adjusting his grip on the spear. Her touch was careful, guiding him through the motions. She showed him how to stand, how to move his feet, how to balance his weight. Each movement was done slowly, patiently, as if she wanted him to succeed. Ethan felt awkward at first, nearly tripping over his own feet, but Kaylana chuckled softly at his mistakes. A rare sound that made several warriors glance up in shock. They weren't used to hearing their queen laugh. Slowly, Ethan improved. His stances became steadier, his grip stronger. He even managed a few simple strikes correctly. Surprising himself, Kaylana stepped back, watching him with pride. She said something in her language that sounded encouraging. Her tone warm. Ethan smiled. He couldn't understand her words, but he felt their meaning. He was part of this world now. As days passed, Ethan trained with the warriors, explored the city, and learned pieces of the Verosian language. He helped rebuild houses destroyed in the attack, played with children in the streets, and shared stories about Earth using drawings and gestures. Everywhere he went, people greeted him warmly. Some called him champion. Others called him brother. A few, mostly elders, called him strange star gift. A name that made him laugh. But every night, he ended up on the balcony with Kaylana, watching the sky together. Sometimes they talked through gestures. Sometimes they simply sat in silence, comfortable in each other's presence. One night, Kaylana pointed to the sky, toward the star that represented Earth. She spoke softly. "Ethan, your sky." He nodded, his heart full. Then she pointed to her chest and then to his, the same gesture she always used when expressing the bond she felt toward him. But this time, she added a small motion, a gentle circle just above their joined hands. The meaning was clear. You belong here too. Ethan felt his throat tighten. There was no pressure, no demand, only an invitation. A choice. He looked at the sky again, then at the queen standing beside him, the woman who had fought for him, protected him, chosen him, taught him, and trusted him. He placed his hand over hers and nodded. Kaylana didn't speak. She only smiled, a rare, soft smile that glowed like the moons above. On a planet where strength was everything and destiny was shaped by battle, a human had found a new home, and the queen who had once chosen him by ancient tradition now chose him with her heart, forever.